Chapter 18. Into the Dragon's Den. Vanity. All was vanity. Nora made one last glance toward her reflection in the slender, full-length mirror. She couldn't help but feel a little silly for taking so long getting dressed. After all, she wasn't going far, and she was only going to be seeing the troublesome dragon. Nora quickly reminded herself to keep on task. Even still, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. The woman in the mirror quirked her brow, giving her a pointed look of disapproval. Nora turned. "I know it's tacky. That's the point," she snapped at her reflection, and then groaned. While her green, loose-fitting trousers were warm, they poofed over her black riding boots, and her large green tunic went all the way down past her knees. Well, technically, it was Vila's shirt, but that's what he got for going without her. Nora stepped back and let out a frazzled sigh. She felt like a big green bush. Still, she had a bloody good reason. If she had anything sparkly on, any glint of metal or jewelry, or abnormal garments and bright colors, the dragon might be distracted. Dragons were a lot like ravens. They were entitled little thieves that stole everything, and anything that wasn't nailed down. She let out another disgruntled sigh, while adding a simple black leather belt which kept her long tunic from looking like a bush. Now she felt more like a rumpled evergreen. With one last quick shimmy, she turned away from the mirror. This would have to do until she could go shopping. In her hurry to leave, she had left so many things back in Glendon, but she was too proud and too bitter to send a letter to ask for her things back. Ready to go, she grabbed her mage's staff. The staff was made out of carved maple that was stained with a dark maroon color. While the staff looked mysterious, it didn't have any powers. Staves and wands merely acted as tools of leverage and focus, much like a shepherd's rod or sling. Other mages preferred wands, as they were typically more portable, but when it came to dealing with dragons, Nora preferred to have as much leverage as she could possibly get. A white, frosty cloud of mist huffed and puffed from her lips as she waded through the snow until finally she reached the small side door. Nora muttered under her breath as she was about to lift the brass door knocker. "Son of Maltine! Why am I knocking on my own bloody house?" she scolded herself. It was already bad enough to have to enter through the servants' quarters, but the last thing she wanted was the dragon getting loose until she knew how big of a problem dragon she was dealing with first. However, when she attempted to open the door, she found it was frozen shut. Being an elemental mage, this was not a problem for her. The only difficult part was finding heat in the already cold climate. Any self-made witch could light a candle flame, but when it came to anything larger, she had to draw the heat from someplace else. A little body heat to ignite a candle wick was nothing. Unthawing a frozen door? Well, that was a little more complicated. If she used her own body heat, she would likely succeed, and then shortly die from hyperthermia. Instead, Nora set the end of her staff onto the door and channeled the heat from the ambient air around her and funneled it through the shaft. Ice crystals formed on the short, twisted roots on the heavy top end, and hot plumes of steam billowed out at the bottom. With a little bit of pressure, the door gently gave away. Nora cautiously peered into the abandoned kitchen and smiled as she tapped the frosted top knot of her staff onto the door frame and broke away the ice shell like brittle sugar candy, and neatly sidestepped over a fallen pan that still lay on the floor. Well, it seems like everything's still here, she mused out loud. She supposed there was one nice thing about having a dragon living in her house. It certainly kept the looters away. Any other abandoned building would have been stripped bare, and all the windows would have been broken. The question was, should she go up or down? If I was a dragon, where would I be, she wondered. Better question, where could I fit, and where would I want to go? She corrected herself. Judging by how intact the kitchen was, she was quite sure it hadn't been able to fit through the single doors, or at least it hadn't tried hard enough yet. She couldn't help but smile. If Torrin was with her, he would have insisted they check the cellar first. While Nora disapproved of his horrible drinking habit, she couldn't help but wonder what else was in the cellar. Maybe she would find some bread, or strawberry preserve, or... Nora shook her head. Stay focused, she insisted. The sooner she got her house in order, the sooner she would be sleeping in a nice, warm feather bed, and she would have servants bringing her as much strawberry preserve on piping hot, fresh toast as she wanted. She wrinkled her nose. She could already smell Vila's pickled sardines. Gross. Still, the thought of Vila coming back and seeing her in the little burnt-up shack was all the more motivation to keep herself on task. Once she made her way into the entry, she quickly spotted the sign of dragon. But even without the large scratch marks on the marble floors and the stone columns, all she had to do was look up and see the gaping hole in the large vaulted ceiling where the chandelier had been torn down from. This didn't nearly offend her as much as the obnoxious lime green-colored walls. She made a mental note to repaint everything. Keeping focused, Nora readied herself in case she needed to throw up a defensive barrier. This barrier was considered to be an advanced technique, even for experienced elementals like herself. Some mages called it soul magic. The best way Nora could describe the soul barrier was that it was like a blanket of millions of tiny interlocking rings of energy that could take any form. It wasn't telekinesis. Telekinesis required someone to be aware of any incoming object. With this ability, so long as she had the strength and concentration to keep it up, she could block anything, even if it came from behind her. But she had to be careful. Nothing could breach the barrier. Not even her. Nora had learned this the hard way. It felt like she had been struck by a mini bolt of lightning, and had sent her flying back a whole 10 feet. Luckily for her, the moment she touched the barrier was the exact moment she lost control of it. It had not been pleasant, and she had the taste of burnt copper in her mouth for weeks, and whomever she greeted got a nasty little shock. This, of course, was while she was still an apprentice mage. She might have been in trouble if the instructors hadn't been so impressed. Instead, she was sent away to the special dormitories with the rest of the special apprentices, affectionately known as the firebugs. or the wizards. To this day, Nora had to repress the violent urges she felt when anyone ever addressed her or even asked the instant question if she was a wizard or not. There were many other smaller, illegitimate schools in Marne. Those were wizards. Idiots that could call down lightning and set themselves on fire. Founders Keep trained mages. A proper mage was a well-rounded and formally trained in all aspects of magic. Mages were learned, educated, upright individuals that pledged to use their abilities to serve their nation. Wizards went about wearing funny hats stuffed full of bizarre ideas and smelly, dirty robes, and had crumbs stuck in their beards, and said, "Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Please let me try again." Nora pursed her lips and glanced up at the well-traveled twin staircase and turned to the broken-down double doors leading into the dining hall. She was quite confident wherever her chandelier had been taken was where she would find her dragon. Up or down. Don Rascal always advised his novice riders against putting themselves between their dragon and a hard place. Nora smiled. Old man Don Rascal would have chosen to search the top floors first. Dragons were extremely dangerous from above, and especially in close, confined spaces. If Nora had to get out quickly, she didn't want to be running blindly into a broom closet or trapped in a room without any windows. If the dragon came up from behind while she was upstairs, there'd always be a window she could escape through. If she did find the dragon upstairs and things went poorly, she could always go back the way she had come. This would not be possible if the dragon came down while she continued straight ahead into the dining hall. "I better not find you in my bedroom," Nora muttered to herself. Alas, the double doors had been broken down, and the only thing left intact was... No, there was nothing intact. "You little thieving troll," she gasped. While there was no dragon to be found, the bed frame had been torn apart, and all the pillows and blankets had been hauled off. Most likely, he had built a nice little nest for himself somewhere, and was curled up all warm and comfy with her chandeliers. After searching the guest rooms, she quickly found the same pattern repeated everywhere. Sometimes she wished she had been part of a canine unit or worked with horses. Stay focused, Nora told herself. It was fairly obvious that the dragon was not in the upper rooms, and she doubted it would try to squeeze itself into the attic. The attic was another place she would have to explore once she had tamed the dragon and the house finally belonged to her. Nora couldn't help but pause and straighten the picture before leaving the guest bedroom and turned to head back downstairs. It was silly, but the painting reminded her of Warren. She hoped he was well. Making her way back down the winding stairs, Nora was surprised she hadn't gotten the dragon's attention yet. She figured it was either sleeping or hiding on top of its mound of plundered sparkles. She smiled. In the legends, dragons were supposed to hoard gold and gems. But in reality, it was probably just a pile of junk. Bits of debris crunched and echoed under her boots as she entered the dining hall. "You little toad," Nora murmured as she glanced up at the gaping hole in the white plaster, where an even larger chandelier had been ripped down from the ceiling. Her sky-blue eyes narrowed as she spotted the scratch marks where it had been dragged away. Judging by the hole in the ceiling, it had been enormous. It perhaps may have even been beautiful at one time. Nora leaned on her staff and thoughtfully glanced around the dance floor. She wondered if she could get Vila to dance. She hadn't been dancing in such a long time. Vila was very handsome when he was in a suit and his hair was combed. The thought made her smile, but she doubted she would get him to go dancing with her. Unless she told him they were looking for Droon spies, and she desperately needed his protection. Nora paused and held her breath. If the dragon had been sleeping, she was quite certain she would have heard its loud breathing by now. She was close, and she could sense it. Yet somehow she knew the dragon was aware of her as well. Most likely it was hiding or guarding its treasure. Something shimmered in the gloom. Nora lit a candle and her eyes went wide. On the floor, dozens of round, teardrop-shaped, white pearl discs shimmered like abalone. These were scales, dragon scales. The energy and beautiful aura that it emitted was breathtaking. No doubt, the dragon had been using the sharp corners to shed its scales. She had heard stories, even read books of ice dragons, but she hadn't believed them, or at least didn't think they still existed. She had flown through the snowy mountains and landed on the glaciers many times while patrolling northern London. Nora chuckled softly. I'm being silly. It could just be a rare albino, she told herself. She had heard of those, and even seen one before. Had been a nasty, moody creature that liked to steal everything. But it made sense. The people in Helvesti probably saw it as some sort of snow god and spoiled it rotten. Nora shook her head and slipped the scales into her pocket. Well, that's going to end, she declared. Once she was around the bend, the temperature in the room began to rise as she walked into the large steam-filled room and shook her head. At the center was a large, warm mineral hot spring tapped directly from the mountain. On the far corner, to her right, she spotted the dragon's nest. Nora quickly recognized the ruined, musty bedding. It was filled with heaps of plunder and her beautiful, broken chandeliers. Now that she had found the nest, she knew the dragon had to be close by, and she didn't have time to admire the beautiful tilework in the dome ceiling above. Nora eyed the misty pool suspiciously. Sunlight streamed down from the oculus window and danced and twisted within the rising cloud of white mist coming from the natural mineral spring. Oh dear! I wonder where you could be hiding, Nora cooed in a patronizing sing-song voice. She knew exactly where the dragon was hiding. With poised anticipation, she summoned in a gust of warm air from behind her and swept away the thick veil of mist. Two big obsidian eyes gazed up at her from the calm water's surface. Only its snout and shimmering white crown of horns poked out of the pool. Nora tilted her head. By the fully developed crown, she could tell there was a large, fully mature dragon waiting beneath the murky green mineral water. While she couldn't know for certain, by the soft ridges and a slimmer jawline and shy behavior, she most likely was dealing with a hendrake. This, of course, didn't mean less dangerous. It just meant she could expect more passive aggression Most males would have attempted to chase her out by now, but this dragon was patiently waiting to spring an ambush. Nora smiled. "You are a very strange dragon," she teased, as she prepared an invisible barrier around herself. But she had to be careful. She could only maintain the protective ward for up to a minute without severe health risks. But she was fairly certain, by the dragon's cagey body language, she was going to need it soon. The dragon stared back at her. Its pitch-black eyes were wide and hyper-vigilant. "You have made a very big mess," Nora cooed. The dragon hissed at her agitatedly. Instead of backing away, Nora stepped toward the nest. The dragon attacked and let out a snarled yelp as it slammed its snout into the invisible barrier. If the dragon had been dealing with anyone else, it would have bitten their head off and tossed their mangled body about like a rag doll, without so much as a second thought. Nora smiled with satisfaction as she allowed the barrier to fall away. She couldn't hold it for long, and she didn't want to become overly fatigued. "Oh my, what have you got piled up over there?" Nora mused out loud. The dragon hissed, but the moment it could lunge at her again, she spun around and gave it a good rap on the snout with her staff. "No," Nora commanded sternly. She didn't raise her voice. She wanted the dragon to get used to following commands without her shouting. Dragons had very good hearing, and she would only look like an absolute lunatic if she went about shouting at the poor thing all the time. The dragon quickly recoiled and slipped back into the pool, albeit the loud snarl and menacing open jaws showed that this little feud between them was not over. Once again she spoke in a calm but stern voice. "No," she commanded. Knowing full well that the dragon would try to attack again, she gripped her staff and focused once more. Once the barrier was in place, she turned her back, daring the dragon to come at her again. However, instead of biting her like last time, she suddenly found herself completely and utterly engulfed in white mist. Nora gasped in shock as a thick dome of ice rapidly crystallized around her ward. The barrier had saved her from being turned into an ice sculpture, but now she was trapped. The dragon let out an excited, chortling growl as it came at her again. Too dazed to keep the barrier up and unable to get away, Nora threw herself to the ground and held up her staff, ready to kill it if she had to. But the dragon was not able to break through. She could see the vivid silhouette of the rows of large, curved, dagger-like teeth scraping on the outer surface. Right then, she realized the dome of ice was too large for the dragon to wrap its jaws around, and all it could do was scratch and slobber. Once she realized she had time to recover, she suddenly became aware that the dragon had not breathed fire. "Amazing!" she marveled. This was absolutely amazing. All she had to do was break free and not die, and she might actually be able to tell somebody about it. Winter was a frost dragon. Yes, that was going to be her name until she could come up with something more original. Winter growled back at her, but before the dragon could climb out of the pool and crack open the ice bubble with its large talons, Nora set the top of her staff on the ceiling of the ice dome and quickly melted a small little hole on top. Knowing full well she would be killed the second she popped her head out, she sent a little grape-sized fireball floating up into the air. Winter eyed the little flame with suspicion and instinctively snapped at it. But the moment she did, there was a second and then a third circling around her head. The dragon growled angrily and snapped again and again until She became so frustrated she forgot all about the mage in front of her. "I said no," Nora shouted as she sprang free and walloped Winter over the snout for a second time. Winter yelped and Nora nodded in satisfaction, but it wasn't long before the disgruntled dragon began to size her up again. "No?" she repeated, this time in a softer, gentler voice. However, when she tried to move toward the dragon's nest, Winter let out a shrill howl, and this time she quickly swam over to the water's edge and blocked Nora's path, using her full body. As she fanned out her massive white velvet wings and raised up on her haunches to brandish claws and long, menacing whip-like tail. "Those are my blankets and my chandeliers," Nora insisted. While both bedding and chandeliers were ruined, she was merely trying to prove a point. Winter lashed at the mage with her tail, but Nora calmly passed behind the large pillar, allowing the dragon's tail to glance off the marble. Nora continued to advance. The dragon's nostrils flared. The moment the mage moved out into the open, Winter lashed out again. A wall of blue sparks sprayed up into the air as her tail connected with the invisible ward. Winter yelped as she recoiled her singed tail. Nora sighed. "You're being difficult," she scolded. This was an understatement. Any other mage would have been forced to kill the poor Hendrake. Not many could outcast her. Well, there was one she knew of, Magi Hendricks. He was the head dueling mage at Founders. The man could vaporize 2 arrows in mid-flight. While Nora couldn't exactly communicate telepathically to dragons like Simmons could, she was quite capable of stating her intentions and understanding theirs. Like any other living creature, it was really about tone and body language, and right now, Winter was very, very upset and frightened. And by the way the Hendrake was puffing out her chest and coiled back, she was gathering her strength for another frost attack. "No," Nora whispered in a soft, stern warning. The dragon didn't listen. But this time, instead of staying on the defensive and getting stuck inside the ice ball again, Nora drew upon the plentiful heat rising from the mineral spring and struck back. A river of fire and frost clashed together. The dragon's roar was loud, long, and terrible. But Nora had the advantage. The dragon could only sustain what its massive lungs could spew. Finally, the dragon was forced to breathe, and when it did, it inhaled a mouthful of white steam that burnt her tongue and scalded her throat. Not badly, but enough to be very uncomfortable. Winter quickly recoiled and huddled its head down low, finally accepting defeat. Its frightened, big black eyes gazed up at her. Nora set her staff down and panted softly. She was fatigued and drenched with sweat, but she wasn't about to show weakness now. When she tried to move forward, Winter used her large, shimmering, white scaly body to block her path, albeit this time her posture remained low and submissive. It was clear the dragon had lost the will to fight, but Winter was still stubbornly trying to block the path to her nest full of treasured sparkles, even if only passively laying in front of it. Nora sighed and glared at the dragon, and impatiently tapped her foot. Winter's tail swiveled back around. Nora prepared to charge the energy field again, But instead of trying to take her head off, the dragon set a small, broken crystal fragment down at the mage's feet. While it was a mere fraction of the two massive crystal chandeliers piled up in her nest, it was still a nice gesture. "Thank you, Winter. You are very generous," Nora praised her, but instead of picking up the crystal, she reached down and gently stroked the frost dragon's tender snout. Surprisingly, despite the wintry appearance, the frost dragon's soft nostrils were quite warm to the touch. For a moment she shied away, but Winter finally settled down and allowed Nora to continue to stroke her. Nora smiled when Winter's big black eyes began to close. "You aren't so mean, are you?" Nora cooed softly. "You like water. And all the stupid heads were giving you nasty dry ashes, weren't they?" she whispered. She wasn't sure if Winter could understand, but the dragon responded with a low, rumbling whine that seemed to imply she was getting someplace. "Well, I can't let you stay in here. You're making an awful mess," she mused out loud, all the while speaking in a rhythmic sing-song voice. "Are you hungry?" Nora asked. There was no response. She tilted her head to the side. The dragon's eyes were shut, and long and deep rhythmic breaths echoed throughout the marble bathhouse. Fire dragons typically got rather sluggish and sleepy after breathing fire. It wasn't a pleasurable thing for them, and she could only imagine frost dragons might share some of the similarities. "I will bring you back something nice," she promised in a soft whisper. Nora straightened up and let out a tired but contented sigh. Things had gone surprisingly well. So long as she didn't try to move the dragon from the hot springs, she and Winter would get along swimmingly. Now she had to crack some human heads and twist some arms to have the whole bloody damned mansion and the dragon stalls remodeled to accommodate a frost dragon. The bloody fools had no idea what they were dealing with. Admittedly, she had no idea either, but it was obvious. Winter liked warm water. Supposedly, the Baru waste was full of mineral springs. She couldn't help but wonder how many more frost dragons could be out there. Everyone always looked in the mountains and cliffs for dragons, and she felt a little bit silly for even thinking of fire dragons as being normal. Even they were endangered and hard to find, but compared to Winter was truly one of a kind. She had never thought any creature could ever take Golden Eye's place. She knew Winter never would, but after meeting the hendrake, she was already attached and very upset at how the poor dragon was being treated. Nora smiled as she exited the same way she had come. She was surprised how long she had been inside. It had felt like only a few hours, but the sun was already starting to go down, and there was still so much to do. Nora marched through the snow-filled courtyard, but right when she came to the main gate, her smile fell away. She couldn't wear this. She quickly turned back around and ran to her burnt-up yurt and began rummaging through her travel chests. Dealing with her new dragon was only half the battle. She hadn't packed any of her nice dresses. That entitled green-eyed toad, Irene, was probably rummaging through her closet right now. None of her dresses would fit her, of course. Irene was much shorter. This didn't help make Nora feel any better, as this meant Irene would have to cut them off at the knee to make them fit. Being so tall, it was nearly impossible to find clothes her size. It had also been the reason why she hadn't chosen her sword companion from the myriad of skilled young warriors at Founder's training yard. Despite being wonderful in almost every way, Vila was also just the right height to make her feel small. Small in a good way. His massive tattooed arms could utterly engulf her. The very thought made her feel hot and feverish all over. She smiled when she realized Vila was aware of her excitement through the soul bond, and the hug she felt was much more than a fond memory. Nora spun around. She was so excited. The first thing she was going to buy was a horse, for now she would settle with her military dress uniform. That was one outfit she could not throw away or leave behind. Well, not without causing more trouble than it was worth. She grimaced. More green, but at least this fit. She stood a little taller as she fixed the twin silver nautical stars on her high collar that designated her as a mage. The northern point at the top was painted black and blue, indicating she was the member of Dragonhall, and the west wing was painted maroon and turquoise, showing that she was an elemental mage as well. There, of course, were some special snowflakes, wizards like Irene, who did not come from Founders, would only a blank silver star. Unless, of course, they were dragon riders. Torn and Warren both weren't mages, yet still were part of Dragonhall, would merely wear black and blue rectangle bar that was bordered with bronze. The 7 golden bands on Nora's sleeve signified her rank as a war mage. The rank below her was a battle mage, and the rank below a battle mage was a field mage, and so on and so on. Naturally, she never wore her dress uniforms out in the field. These were only used for formal occasions, or when she wanted to strut around and scare everyone half to death during inspections. Nora draped her heavy mage's cloak over her shoulders. Out of shame, she had left her dragon rider's cloak back in Glendon. For now, all she had was her elemental cloak, which was half vibrant turquoise and dark maroon. It didn't go well with the green uniform, but it didn't matter. The moment any soldier saw the golden stripes on her sleeve, they would quickly find something very important to do. Dressing to impress, Nora went to her jewelry box and smiled as she fished out her favorite pearl earrings, and then hesitated. Instead, she found the white dragon scales, and with a little bit of magic and some modification, she gently set aside the loose pearls and hung the dragon scales to her pierced ears. Nora smiled as she turned her head side to side. The scales shimmered like abalone. Don Rascal would not have approved of her wearing dragon scales, but Nora was planning on making the biggest scene imaginable, and she was going to look stunning while doing it. The dragon scales would serve as irrefutable proof that she had met Winter and wasn't merely throwing a tantrum. Naturally, she wanted her house back, but she couldn't move Winter without having some place suitable for housing a frost dragon. The first thing she needed was for another large pool to be dug inside the barn, and the natural hot water to be diverted so Winter could have a place to stay besides her mansion. Once the dragon had a nice place of her own, Nora could focus on flying. After she was finished looking herself over, Nora quickly bundled herself in a black silk robe. She couldn't go into the barn to get Simmons wearing her dress uniform. Prince would be all sorts of excited, and not in a good way. Once she was covered up in black, Nora marched toward the barn. She beamed happily as she spotted Simmons climbing down from the hayloft. "You're awake!" Nora exclaimed. Simmons nodded. "It's almost dark," he lamented. "But you were right. I needed the sleep. I feel a lot better. But I really should be getting back now." "Wonderful! Do you think you can drop me off someplace on your way back by chance?" she asked. Simmons held his belly and laughed. "I know that smile. Whose head are you going to bite off?" he asked. "I am not going to bite anyone's head off. I am just going to have a talk with the mayor. It isn't far. By dragon, it's only 5 minutes away. You could just drop me off and I'll handle the rest," she declared with a fiercely determined grin. "All right, Crazy Eyes. Let me get Prince saddled up and ready to go," he chuckled. "Simmons?" "Yes?" "Do I really have crazy eyes? Or are you just saying that?" she asked weirdly. Vila had mentioned it once, but she had merely laughed. But now Simmons had brought it up as well. She fought the urge to run back to her yurt and check the mirror. Simmons smirked as he quickly secured the lash strap to the saddle harness. No, of course not. I was just teasing," he assured her. Nora smiled and let out a sigh of relief. "Are you ready to go?" he asked. She quickly nodded, and he guided her round back and made sure she was good and secure before getting on himself. Once they were out of the barn and under the open sky, Prince chirped excitedly and stretched out his wings. The little nap had done wonders, and he was ready to fly again. Nora had to hold tight onto Simmons as the dragon's powerful black wings sent them soaring right over the wall and up into the air. Nora looked back. Her poor little burnt-up yurt was now absolutely plastered with snow. But none of that mattered when she saw the city below. Right then, she knew she would triumph. She knew that she would fly again, and one day she might even redeem herself. Soon her determined gaze settled upon the governor's estate below, and she watched with grim satisfaction as the servants went running and the guards held onto their helmets and stared up in dismay. Prince gracefully touched down, just long enough for Nora to hop off while everyone turned away from the swirling gale of wind and snow. "Halt! Who goes there?" called a reluctant guard. "I am Nora Frey," she declared, and with a dramatic flourish she unclasped her black covering and discarded it on the ground, so that all would recognize her uniform. The moment she emerged from the swirling white flurries of snow, the guards immediately snapped to attention, and a servant rushed forward to gather up her discarded black cloak. "Who is in charge here?" she demanded. "Sergeant Monty at your service, Magi," he saluted. This is a very big surprise. We weren't expecting you. I'm so glad you're on our side." "Does Governor Von Claris know you're coming?" he asked. "Who is on watch?" Nora demanded. "I didn't even hear one alarm or any sound of warning as we approached. If I had been a rival Droon mage, you would all be dead." Nora knew such an attack would never happen. According to Vila, the lands west of them were not controlled by the Droon, and they didn't use magic, and if anything, they might even be considered natural allies against the Droon. But it was the principle that truly mattered. Anything Sergeant Monty was going to say was going to be wrong. she would make certain of it. Sergeant Multi gulped. I will find out at once. You don't know, Nora snapped at him. There is so many high. Disgraceful. You should all be publicly flogged. Sergeant Monty fell to his knees. Please, Magi. It's overcast. The clouds are low. If anyone should take punishment, it should be me. I instructed them to keep watch on the road. That is not necessary. Find those responsible and punish them, Nora commanded. But Sergeant Monte remained on his knees. I am responsible, Magi, he insisted. Nora hesitated and glanced back at him. Most would roll over on their belly, soil themselves, and sacrifice as many subordinates that it would take to appease her, just so they could save their own miserable hides. Well, sometimes Nora felt a little guilty for kicking the regular enlisted soldiers around. She was always surprised to find a few beautiful souls who refused to back down. Strong men, hard men, who wouldn't sell out their subordinates no matter how much you twisted their arms and threatened them. Get on your feet and do as you're told, Nora snapped. Sergeant Monty refused to rise. Nora glanced about. Everyone silently watched. Some of them were even in tears. Nora felt as if she might cry herself, but she wasn't going to. Master Sergeant Monty, extend your hand, she commanded. Sergeant Monty hesitantly lifted his head, both perplexed by why she had called him by the wrong rank, and yet clearly too frightened to correct her. I am demoting you to staff sergeant, and I am reassigning you to be the head of security over my own mansion and dragon colony, she declared, and then firmly pressed a heavy gold coin into his gloved hand. Nora smiled as she watched the former Sergeant Monty try to do the math. She had promoted him 2 ranks and demoted him 1. Staff Sergeant Monty stared up at her, his face suddenly alight. But, Magi, the mansion has been abandoned, and the dragon, he began. Nora Frey smiled as she bid him to rise to his feet. The dragon is now in good hands, and the mansion is being renovated. I trust you and your men will make certain no one will steal any building supplies, she declared. Staff Sergeant Monty blinked. When is this happening, he asked. I'm confident work will begin first thing tomorrow, she declared, with as much confidence as she could muster. Part of leadership in getting anything started was acting and believing it would be so. But what about Governor Von Claris? I just can't order everyone to leave now, can I? I will see that the governor is informed, Nora assured him. It will be done as you say, Magi. Staff Sergeant Monty saluted. Nora nodded, and when she turned, she was buffeted by the sudden outburst of loud cheers as the guards and servants celebrated the newly promoted Staff Sergeant Monty. When she looked back, she smiled when she saw his men parading their fearless leader about the courtyard like a war hero. But she didn't linger. She had business to attend to. Her long gold trim overcoat glided behind her as she bounded up the stairs, and the servants beamed at her as they gave her the sweeping, glamorous double-door entrance that took both the butler and housekeepers by utter surprise as she came striding unannounced into the vibrant orange marble entry. "What in the world is all the commotion going on outside?" exclaimed the butler. But the staff quickly gave him a bug-eyed stare and silently gestured over toward the war mage standing at the entry. The butler quickly straightened up, gave himself a quick pat down, fixed his black cuffs and white gloves before hesitantly approaching their unexpected but clearly very important guest. "Oh my, forgive me, Magi. May I take your coat?" he asked timidly. "No, you can take me to Von Claris," she commanded. The butler swallowed hard as he quickly contemplated his options and offered a weak smile as he beckoned her to follow. Chapter 19 Governor Von Claris. My name is Marco, and I am the author, narrator, and glee man for Founders Keep. I wrote this during the lockdowns, and it is an audiobook for free on my YouTube channel at Dragon Audiobooks. If you want to read along, and if you absolutely love the book, you can get the hard copy, and you can get it in digital. The cool thing about this book is that you can share it with your friends. And you know J.R. Tolkien. Would you like to write him? You can't. He's gone. J.K. Rowling. You probably could messenger. She's a busy lady. She might get back to you. But me, I am here to entertain you. I am not just a writer. I am a glee man, if you will. And I do podcasts. I do audiobooks. So not only will you get this audiobook, you'll get all the other stuff that I put out on YouTube. And the most important thing, a sword. The most important thing, there will be dragons. There'll be lots of dragons. And most fantasy books, dragons have gone extinct and they're gone. These dragons are very much here and real. So there will be dragons. So Founders Keeps, fantasy fiction, magic, mages, swords, true love, revenge, Dragon Audiobooks. Follow me on Twitter, Dragon Audiobooks, YouTube.